This lesson is part 2 of chapter 6, general maintenance. And in this lesson we're going to cover backups, changing your password, and vendor payees. So please turn in your new client handbook to page 103, backups. Where we touched on this a little bit in the lesson, the last lesson. So to get to backups, you go to General Maintenance Backups, UAN Backup. So again, that's not the accounting module, but the general module, and then maintenance. And here you can see your functions on the left. The first one is backups. Notice that backups has got a little arrow pointing to the right to, well, on the left-hand corner, it's got a little arrow. That means that there's a submenu. If I click on backups, I've got two options, UAN Backup and My Documents Backup. We'll get to My Documents Backup. Let's talk about the UAN Backup option first. That is, that'll open up a separate form, and the UAN Backup will create a backup disk or a CD, DVD, or a copy information to a flash or a thumb drive, anything with a USB port. So the purpose of this, when we flip to the book here, we'll just read the overview. The UAN Backup enables the user to store the local government's data in a safe location off-site so that it can be made available on a replacement computer in the event the information is lost or cannot be used. So for example, if a fire destroyed the UAN computer, the latest backup could be quickly and easily restored to another computer with the assistance of UAN technical support. Well, let's hope you guys don't have a fire in the office that you hold your UAN computer. We don't see that very often. That can happen, and of course that's why we have this backup option. It's something outside of the UAN computer, storing the data on media outside the UAN computer. But a more common example, hopefully, is not a fire, but maybe power surges. Even if you buy a good surge protector, which I recommend that you do, and maybe a battery backup for your UAN computer, even with that, that can't prevent everything, and so you could get that electrical storm that zaps through, the surge protector and into the UAN computer and just fries your hard drive. That can happen, or cause enough problem that you're going to have to get a major portion of your computer repaired or replaced. And so if that happens and you lose all the information on the computer, the whole purpose of this is to so that you have a backup outside of the computer. Once we get that parts replaced or the computer replaced, then a tech support person would be able to restore these backup files that were saved in another location. And remember, if you recall from the last session, we talked about the entity setup, and under the where was it? Under the system page, under entity setup, you have to perform one of these UAN backups every 30 days, at the minimum every 30 days, before you can perform any transaction, or less. You can set that to up to a daily backup in which the software will force you to do that. Please note that applies to only the UAN backup. So we're talking about the data related to this software only, not your minute. Maybe if you create minute software or create some spreadsheets for other information on your own, that data will not be backed up on the UAN when you perform this UAN backup procedure. We'll talk about how to get that data backed up in another way, but it's not here. This is just the UAN software backup. All right, and that's what this says here. Required at the minimum every 30 days. We recommend that you perform frequent backups, not just the minimum of 30 days. As you'll see, it actually goes pretty fast, so it's not really going to eat up a lot of your time to do backup more than every 30 days. And develop and maintain a rotation schedule of your backup media. Well, let's talk about the backup media. We'll look at the form now. If you click on, so again, general maintenance backups and then UAN backup, it opens up the standalone form, UAN backup, and really for 99% of you, you only have to do two things. You have to name the file and pick the destination, whether it's going to be a CD or DVD or a flash drive, USB drive. So one of these two types of media, I guess there's more than two types, but is it going to be a disk or a USB drive? You'll make that choice and then you'll name the file. Well, let's first talk about what applies to just 0.01% of you guys so that you know what to ignore, and that is this network drive or other. Well, that's if you have a drive, just a second. If you have some other, if your UAN computer, your UAN computer is connected to a network. So you've got shared, your files are shared on a network, or your computer is at least connected to a network. Well, in our experience so far, most of our customers don't have their UAN computers just a standalone system, and so they're not connected to the network. So if that's the case, you're never going to be connected to a network, you would not ever choose the setting, network drive. I don't think, there's some other cases where maybe you have non-USB port, but you can give us a call if you have any questions about that. The other setting here is this SQL Server Advanced, and it's advanced for a reason because it's an advanced setting. Notice that in gray it says only uncheck this checkbox if instructed by UAN, big exclamation point. So basically, if you're not on a network, you just leave this as is. It's filled in as a default. You don't check it or uncheck it. You just leave it alone, and you deal with these two settings. If you are on a network, then you'll be, at some point, your tech support person. These are usually for some of our larger libraries or townships. They have a large network system, and they usually have usually would have a technical support person that's part of your staff, and so they would already be managing this, and it'll be taken care of. You'll learn how to do that. But for most of you, like I said, 99%, you're going to have a standalone machine, and you'll use this setting or this setting. Well, a CD or DVD. Now let's look at that one first. It'll default to this first, and notice it gives you a path. Well, the D drive is for the disk drive. You can browse there, and I don't believe you just only have one on your UAN computer, a disk drive. It might be labeled E or something like that, but it's whatever your disk drive is, and you can burn the backup to that, either a DVD or a CD, if you choose that setting. If you choose flash or USB drive, again, this letter here, the E, if I click on Browse, this is kind of determined by when you plug in that flash drive or USB drive. Now, if you don't know what a flash drive or USB drive is, a flash drive is like one. It's a type of media we can store usually nowadays a lot of information on it, and they're fairly cheap now. You can get them at most stores that sell computer information, and they're usually about a couple inches long, and so they're small little things that you plug into a USB port on your computer. They're also sometimes referred to as thumb drives. So This is for the flash drive or thumb drive, this is called, or a USB drive. So if you have maybe it's not a flash drive, maybe an external hard drive, and if you're more technically inclined, you know, like a terabyte hard drive, a huge hard drive. As long as it plugs in with a USB connection, you can choose this option, and you can back up to that drive. So that's what that's for. And notice that it will default to, it'll create a UAN Backups folder for you. Okay. Now let's say for whatever reason you have two USB drives connected to your computer for various reasons. It will list both of those drives that are connected, and you can select which one that you want to use. So I only have one. I can see I have a lot of information, a lot of folders on this drive, but it'll default to the, what's on here somewhere, UAN Backups folder. Or it might not be on it. It'll create a folder called UAN Backups if it doesn't exist. There it is, UAN Backups. And then and it'll save it under that folder. It's not something that you would restore yourself. A tech support person would restore that in case your computer, you know, gets shot and you have to get it restored somewhere else. But so let's say we select a flash. That's what I have on my computer. And then notice the name, UAN Backup. It date stamps it and time stamps it, military time, but it'll time stamp the file. You can always override this and change it to whatever you want or add to it. Maybe I want to say this is my September backup. So I just call it September backup, whatever you want to name it. And then you would click on Start. So I'll just demonstrate what this looks like. It actually just takes a few minutes, and this will back up the data. Right now it's September 7th on my, this actual date in the calendar. If I had a year's worth of transactions, this would back up January 1st through September 7th. So you don't really pick the date range. It's the actual day that you're on, the calendar date. Excuse me. And no matter what, if it's January 30th or December 31st, backing up to flash drive typically takes about 3 minutes or less. I don't have much data, so it's taking probably less at this point. You can just kind of watch the screen if you want. It's going to read off some information. It's backing up, updating some reports. At the very end, it should say backup complete. It doesn't say that, you haven't finished the backup. So if I were to go out to this file, which I'll do, actually I have it open on my screen here under UAN Backups. It just created a file, and then I named it September UAN Backup with the date and timestamp. I could save several backups. As long as I have room on this media, this flash drive, I could save several backups to this folder. So now that gets back to our recommendation. And the same thing for DVD. If I save it to a DVD or a CD, as long as I can fit the information on that media, I can back up. If I back up every week, I can back up several copies to that one piece, that media type, to that flash drive, in my case. The problem here, though I'll point out, we recommend that you develop and maintain a rotation schedule for your backups. So if you've got one of those huge terabyte, 2 terabyte hard drives, external hard drives, and you're backing it up, just be aware that, USB connections can break, just like anything else. Or flash drives, if you have a large flash thumb drives, if you just use one of them, those can break or get lost. So what you really want to do is, or what we recommend is, maybe you have, they're cheap enough now that you buy 2 or 3 USB flash drives, and let's say you back up on a weekly basis. You've chosen to do that. Well, on week 1, you use the one flash drive, and you can label it as this flash drive. And then the next week you use a second flash drive, and the third week you use a third flash drive, and then the fourth week you start over again. Or maybe use 4 of them. And so you just rotate through. And so even if all 3 or 4 of those get damaged, if you, at least as long as you have one, you never have more than a month. Let's say if you rotate 4 every week and do a weekly backup, then you'll never have, as long as you have one of them, you'll have at least a month's worth. You only lose 30 days of data if you do it that way, versus if you have one drive and you back up weekly, you could lose you could lose more than that depending on the situation. So it depends on how often you require yourself to back up. But the point is that it's a safer bet now, but it will allow you to back up to the same drive each time if that's what you choose to do. So what else was I going to say about that? Forgot. Yeah, so keep a backup rotation, backup often. Oh yes, these backup files are encrypted, so someone can't just go and load your data on and restore it. Our technical support folks will have to restore the data with the backup file, and so you don't have to worry about someone getting hold of that data. These are encrypted files. Okay, so that's it for UAN Backups. I'll close this. Notice that there's also the My Documents backup. If I click on that, it says, please note this function will back up the My Documents folder of the current Windows user administrator. If other Windows accounts exist on the computer, this will not be included. So I'm logged in as Brutus. I'm administrator. If I log in as the assistant, my assistant, they may have a different My Documents folder. This backup will only back up that My Documents folder. And you can see this is a simpler screen because there's no section here. And you can choose to back up the My Documents folder, and it'll be labeled as a My Documents backup. This is not, you're not forced to do this at any point. It's completely optional. The purpose of this is that, and if I go back to my desktop, you'll have a desktop similar to this. Yours will usually have the My Documents folder, a shortcut to it right here when you log into the computer. And it'll contain some information already, like your UAN manuals, maybe the quick tips, etc. But here you could save. Here you can see I have a few files already. Here you could save the, like let's say create a folder and call it minutes. And if you use Microsoft Word to create your minutes files, you could save all of your minutes in the minutes folder under My Documents, and then save spreadsheets under My Documents. As long as you save it in this folder, which is located here or under Start, My Documents, as long as you save it in this folder, when you use this backup, it'll back up that information. So the purpose of the My Documents backup is to back up anything that's not UAN, but is on your UAN computer. This backup, the UAN backup, will not do that. Again, it will only back up the UAN data. This will allow you to back up other folders or other files and folders as long as you place them in that My Document directory. And it works the exact same way, so I'll leave that alone, and I won't demonstrate that one. All right, and then lastly for this lesson, we're going to go over, actually, take that back, we've got 2 other things. The next we're going to go over change password. That's very simple as long as you log in as under your username. So I logged in under Brutus. I can change my own password. So I'll click on Change Password. You'll need to type in my current password, the new password 2 times to verify it, and I can change it to something else. You can change it as much as you want. You can change it you can change it daily if you want to. Be really secure. And if we turn to page 105, you'll see that I'll go ahead and turn there. On 105, we note that passwords must be changed every 90 days. So we won't allow you to log in to your username. If I try to log into Brutus after 90 days and I haven't changed my password, it will block me out of the software until I change it. And as you can see, the criteria for changing your password is right here. So you can read that over. We try to make it secure, so there's basically you have to use one of these 2 options, either lowercase or one of these 2 of these 4 options. By reading it, it says it better than I do. So you pick 2 of these 4 options. You have to have that in at least 8 characters for it to be a legitimate password in the UAN system. So there's really not too much to changing the password. So we'll move on. And I already mentioned that if you forget your password as an administrator and there's no other UAN users, then you would need to contact UAN support to have us reset your password if you as the administrator forget the password. If it's another user and you have your password as the administrator, you can go to users and reset their password in that place. You notice I don't have my other users in here. I deleted them out from our last lesson. All right, so the last section we're going to go over is vendors' payees. Well, we already touched on this quite a bit when we did purchase order transactions. So I'm just going to give you the a whirlwind overview of this. You can read about all the details in the chapter here, the various options you have. Also under Need Help, General Maintenance, Vendor Payees, click on Need Help, and there's quite a bit of information for vendor payees there. So I suggest reading that over, how to add, suggested reports, and so forth, and in your book. All right, under vendor payees, though, here's our sample list of payees. Notice that the active payees show up by default. I can deactivate payees that aren't preset in the system. For instance, a company, remember we use that a lot in our exercises. If I don't plan to use the companies for the rest of the year, I can deactivate it, and it doesn't show up on a list of active vendors. If I select all, I can see that that one is inactive. And later on, if I plan to use it, I can activate it again. You can only delete vendors that have no activity. So if I try to delete the company, it gives me an error message. I've already used this for some transactions, so I cannot delete the company or this vendor. If I create a brand new vendor with no activity, I can delete it. However, I can, like I showed you, I can deactivate it so it won't show up on certain lists and reports. This is important because the way that the auditors wanted us to set this up is that once you've made any kind of performed any kind of transactions with a vendor, you will not be able to delete that vendor ever. Even when you go into the next fiscal year, you will not be able to delete it if it's had any activity. So the reason is the auditors would like to be able to look back 5 years from now on your prior year reports and see that you made a payment, a one-time payment to the company or to the office supply store, and they have a record of that payment to that vendor in many different places in the software. So they don't want that to be able to be removed like many of the other things, like for instance with budgets, those get reset each year. You start over. with vendors, you don't start over each year unless if you've had activity, you cannot delete them, but you can deactivate so they don't show up in your active list, the list of active vendors. All right, you can also make edits to vendors, certain edits depending on the activity you've had. So here I could say for the company, remember that I made some payments to the company. Now notice under edit, I cannot change the name of the company. So this is important. Maybe I just want to call this vendor. Now this will print on the vendor check, right? The company. So maybe they prefer company instead of the company. Well, you can't change that. You would have to add a new vendor and call it company instead of the company. So be aware of that dynamic. Once you add the vendor and you have some, and you've saved that vendor in the system, you cannot change the name of the vendor. You can make other changes. You can change the script. You can add to the description, the terms, account information. Maybe later on you determine that you need to produce a 1099 for them. You can fill in the 1099 required checkbox and fill in the Social Security or their tax ID. Make them inactive. You can add a different, maybe this store number 2, and add an address for that store. Oops. You see, we got store number 2 or office. And notice in this section here that you can also modify this. So maybe maybe I make a, well, let's see if let me delete the office. I'm not sure if I made a payment to this or not. Click on delete, and it allowed me to do it in this one. So I can delete the office. If I had made a payment to, oh, this is the one. Now the store. This was used on a payment before, so I cannot delete that location either. And that's permanent as well. I may never use that store location again. Maybe the store closed down. Well, that's fine. I don't have to show it up on this list. I can make it inactive. Notice its filter is active, so I could deactivate it. And so now the only thing that shows up here is the store number 2. And I can use that, or I can list all, and I can see store 2 is now inactive. So we've already discussed most of the other features here. Just a reminder, 1099s, if you think they may be required for this vendor, you can select the checkbox, and you have to fill in, when you do that, you have to fill in the Social Security or the tax ID. But I guess err on the side of caution. If you have this checkbox and it prints a 1099, when you go, you print your yearly 1099s. If they don't really require that, all you wasted is 1099 form and a little bit of time. So, but that's where it's controlled, is right here. Let's see, in adding, be aware again. I'll call this ABC company. The available in, that determines what form this vendor will be available in. So, for instance, receipts. Click on accounting receipts. Then this will only be available under accounting receipts. By default, I don't need a location, but I can add one. Now, by adding, I have to save this vendor first. So I click OK, and we'll say, again, the store location. And I would normally fill in the address, etc., contact name. And then if I save this, so now I've got the ABC company. If I go to record a receipt, then now that vendor, ABC company, will show up under receipts. But since I did not select payments, if I look at the ABC company again, haven't selected payments or purchases. If I go to transactions and select payments, try to add a payment. ABC company is not listed there. So that drives where, again, where that vendor is, what form that vendor is available in. Also determines, yeah, actually that's what it determines, is where it'll be, what form these vendors are available in. Some of these may not apply right now, like payroll withholdings, but we don't have the payroll module, but it's in there. If you don't use inventory, then it will make a difference for you if you select inventory, but if you do use that program, then you would select inventory so that vendor will show up in your list for inventories. Okay, so that is it for vendors and payees. They, as we saw before, well, I got one other thing to show you for purchase orders, because we touched on this when we did purchase orders. Under accounting transactions purchase orders, remember that we have this additional tab where we have the billing and shipping address, and by default it automatically includes your entity in the billing and shipping address. If you look under here, I've got other options, like I just threw these in here: Parks Department, County Auditor, Buckeye Electric Power. Well, probably not going to want to do that. But let's say you have, maybe your township has 2 locations. So under billing, you would bill them at 1 location, but change under Buckeye Township location number 2. You'd have a hardware shipped, or whatever, a purchase shipped to a different location in the township. Or maybe, for instance, you just have everything shipped to the Parks Department. So you could select that. Well, this vendor will only show up on this list if I have, under vendor payees, for instance, if I go to Parks Department, we can see that I have this checked: accounting, purchases, bill to, and ship to. And so that's going to be used for very few vendors, but it's possible. For most of you, though, you'll probably use your township as, and actually it's not even listed on your vendor list, it's under the general maintenance. It's going to pull in your township information. Under, where are we at? Entity setup. Yes, it'll pull in your township information there. Okay, so lastly, reports and statements. There are a few important things here. The vendor payee reports are probably the most useful for you. And if you click on that, there are quite a few vendor payee reports. We mentioned a few throughout class. I'd highly recommend, once you get some vendors and some transactions, well, once you get some vendors in here, go through these reports and print them out. Some of them will not be relevant until you actually have some transactions, like a payment register, receipt register, etc. But print them out, and at some point print all of these reports so you can get an idea of what's available for your use in the vendor payees. Even though you may not use all of them all the time, it's good to know what's there. And then also we've got the transaction log report. This report shows you everything, every transaction that occurred in all modules. So it's a great report. It's extremely detailed. So you're not going to want to print this all the time, but it does show you everything. So it's going to be very long, but it can be useful when you're troubleshooting different problems or investigating certain things. You can print the transaction log and take a look at that, a great level of detail for all, and see all of your transactions that occurred. The backdating report. Remember, I mentioned that you want to be careful with backdating. You only want to backdate when you're going to have to be able to justify when you backdate certain transactions like electronic payments or manual warrants or receipts. But there are good reasons to backdate, and so, but be aware that your auditors are going to see every instance of your backdating on this backdating report. So if you look here, I've got quite a few, and that's because for our demonstrations, I had to backdate everything back to January or February. So that's not a good. This is not a good example in a normal year to have all this backdating. Okay, I've got an excessive amount of backdating here. But again, so my auditor would see every instance that I backdated on this report. So it shows them and you the posting date, and the transaction date. So I posted it on the January, but it actually used it or recorded this in April. So I really backdated that. But it does include, you can't include a purpose there or a reason, the purpose field, so they could see. That's where, like in the receipts form, where you justify. For instance, a good reason for backdating would be you get your bank statement, it shows interest posted on December 31st of August, but it's September 7th now. Well, that's a good reason to backdate your interest revenue receipt, because it had actually hit your bank, increase the cash at the bank on August 31st, so backdating would be legitimate. That's when it actually occurred. So you just want to justify that when you do that. Another reason you might have a lot of backdating is in certain conversion methods, you're going to be doing quite a bit of backdating. So we'll talk about that more when you get to the conversion lesson. And then the compliance, here, these are the reports relate to departments, roles, and users. And you can look those over. The compliance report we'll touch on in Chapter 7 when we talk about compliance violations. All right, so that's it for Chapter 6, General Maintenance. And the next, we'll go over a few miscellaneous items in Chapter 7, very important, some notes in that notes about compliance violations in that chapter.